Hello there, Mad Mike here, and welcome back to the channel. And today we are going to be doing a movie spotlight. And the movie spotlight today is going to be on one of my favorite kind of good bad movies, and that is 1982's Pieces, which was directed by Juan Pierre Simon and stars Christopher George, Linda Day George, Ian Sera, and Edmund Purdom. Um, Now, it's an early 80s slasher. Juan Piquer Simon was I think he's still alive, was a Spanish director who had come in, and he was doing the film, and he had a lot of kind of veterans of the Italian movie scene, and various other kinds of stuff like Frank Brana, who also plays the police sergeant in this. He was in a lot of spaghetti westerns. Christopher George did some work for Lucio Fulci. Ian Sera did some stuff for some other stuff actually for Juan Pierre Simon. So there were a lot of people that were kind of floating around at the time that were doing various other things. But this movie has a lot of experienced actors. Edmund Purdom, too, as well. Was a very experienced actor at this point, even though his career had kind of tailed off, which is why he was in this movie. But the thing is that this movie is so goofy and over the top, and half of it doesn't even make sense. It's just a glorious train wreck of crap, but it's a funny, glorious train wreck of crap. And basically the story revolves around this college campus. It's supposed to be in Boston, and the dean, Edmund Purdom, is basically he's presiding over this college where a bunch of these murders start taking place, where a dude in a black trench coat with a chainsaw is hacking up women all over the campus. And we get this kind of weird little, I mean, you don't really understand necessarily how connected it is until later on in the film, but you see this initial part of it where it's supposed to be like I think the mid to late 40s, in Boston, and this kid like brutally murders his insane mother, who like finds him with a puzzle of a naked woman and says that he's a filthy little pervert. Which again, that's kind of something that actually happens a fair amount in giallo films. Which I believe I would count this as a giallo film technically. I mean, it kind of falls under that, but it really is a bit more like a slasher movie. In terms of kind of the way it's constructed, but it is a whodunit. It's kind of the idea, like, okay, who's killing who? Who's killing who? Because there's a gardener who is suspected. Ian Sera's character is suspected. There's another professor who's suspected, and then eventually the dean is also suspected, and some other people. So I won't give away who is actually doing the killing in case you actually want to watch the film. But the special effects in it are pretty good. I like the special effects. The gore effects are actually pretty convincing. I'm kind of surprised at the quality of them, given what we know about the production. Some of it's a little goofy. Like there's a scene at the beginning where the kid is hacking the mother to death with an axe, and it's like he hits her in the head, but it's obvious that it's like the axe is there, and then he pulls it away, and it's not actually, obviously it's not, they don't do the makeup job to actually show the axe in her head. It just kind of looks that way, and then you have the blood. So you had that, but like ultimately the special effects in it are really, really good. There's a few scenes, the stuff with the chainsaw. When you see the dude, that's the other thing too, because it's a foreign film and based in like that Italian horror type of vein. The gore is intense. The gore is insane. You get to see this guy hacking people up with a chainsaw. And so again, some of it is extremely goofy. There's a death scene where the killer follows this woman into an elevator after like an aerobics class, and he literally has the chainsaw like kind of tucked behind him, but it's like it would be blatantly obvious if you saw the dude walking around that he had a giant yellow chainsaw that was just tucked behind his back. Because the other thing is, you got to remember, this is the 80s. You didn't have these tiny little chainsaws that you have today, where everybody has one in their backyard just for cutting up like tiny logs and stuff. It's a pretty burly chainsaw that he's lugging around. And he just kind of tucks the thing out behind his back and just walks into the elevator, and then he pulls the thing out and pulls the ripcord, and she starts freaking out. It's like, in the amount of time it was going to take him to pull that thing out and pull the ripcord, which, by the way, the fact that it starts on the first pull is bullshit. He comes out and pulls the ripcord. In the time that it took for that to happen, she probably could have run out of the elevator, which is another thing. At least in an earlier scene, they show the guy with the chainsaw, and he's like working on something. He makes it seem like he's like cutting down some brush or something near this girl who's studying on the quad. And he says, "Oh, do you want me to move or whatever? Because if you're gonna keep doing that," she says, "Oh, I'll be done in a minute." So it kind of seems like the gardener, and then he just walks up and just decapitates her in broad daylight. So I mean, that kill is goofy in and of itself, but at least they had the cover of the idea that she thought he was a gardener or something. So it would kind of make sense, but at the same time, when you see the guy, they do show him, but he's like his face is everything is covered up. You can tell that it's not the guy who's playing the actual gardener; it's somebody else, and so it's kind of it ruins that red herring a little bit. Because you kind of realize that it's not the gardener who's doing it, unless there's another guy that just walked up with a chainsaw and decapitated somebody at random. And I will say too, the ending of this movie. Now, actually, sorry. Before I get to that, Christopher George and Linda Day George both do great jobs in this movie. Christopher George is a veteran actor at this point in his career. I don't think he would live very much longer. I think he died in 1984. But he was a pretty seasoned actor. He had worked with a lot of big names in Hollywood in his younger years, and same thing with Edmund Purdom as well. And so basically, they got somebody that really knew what they were doing, and Linda George usually would come with him and be in his films as well, which is I think why she was in that film. She was kind of tagging along with him, and then you have you have the whole subplot between there's a love interest story between Ian Sera and Linda Day George, which never really materializes. It just kind of stunts itself, which is kind of funny. But I do really kind of enjoy the nuances and the insanity of it. There's actually a scene in the middle of the movie where it was a Bruceploitation star, and I guess he was filming another movie that wasn't too far away or something like that. Or the director of Juan Pierre Simon and the guy that was directing that movie knew each other. So he says, "Hey, can you put him in the movie just for publicity's sake?" Because I guess the movies were coming out around the same time. And he said, "Yeah, why not?" And it turns out they call him like a karate professor, but he just like randomly attacks Linda Day George with like these really kind of flashy Bruce Lee type martial arts moves that make absolutely no sense. And then she just kicks him in the balls, and Ian Sera shows up on a motorcycle and explains everything. So it's kind of weird. It comes completely out of nowhere. It makes absolutely no sense in the context of the rest of the film, but I think that's the reason why I find it funny, is because it's just completely random and thrown in there, and there's no real explanation for it, I should say. They do give an explanation in the film, but it's a very, very flimsy one. So, I mean, there's just so much bonkers ass backward stuff in this film that makes almost absolutely no sense. I mean, they have a portion in this film where a journalist gets murdered and nothing happens. That's the other thing, is that the idea in this film is that you have this college campus where all these murders are taking place, and the police know about it, but somehow the press doesn't. That's kind of bizarre, considering that there's people that are just disappearing off the campus. So you figured there would be students that would be asking questions at the very least. But it's almost a cartoonish interpretation of a college, in terms of the way that people act, because it's just a hotbed of sex and violence. It's not really a place. I guess I wouldn't call it a house of learning, just because it doesn't really count as a house of learning. Because the only thing that we really ever see is we see there's a couple like study scenes and book studying, but for the most part, it's just people hanging out and having sex and getting murdered. That's basically all it is, which is kind of your prototypical slasher movie. Which is why I kind of refer to it a bit more in the slasher vein than I do the giallo vein, especially because the director isn't actually Italian; he's Spanish. But moving forward from that, the film itself, it's not too long. It doesn't overstay its welcome. I will say that. I believe the runtime on it is, I don't even think it's 2 hours. I think it's below 2 hours. But the runtime on it does not overstay its welcome, which is good. You don't want a movie like that to go on for over 2 hours. Then you're just being gratuitous and people are going to get bored. And the other thing I will say is the ending ultimately makes up for a lot of the shortcomings in this movie. The ending to this movie is so balls to the wall insane. I can't describe it. And if you've seen the movie, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And the ending makes absolutely no fucking sense with the greater context of the movie. Like it makes absolutely no sense, because the ending is almost supernatural. And the rest of the movie is very much based in reality, or at least what the movie perceives to be reality, where people can just lug around chainsaws and hack people up on a campus and not get caught. Um, but it's mostly based in what we would consider to be reality. The ending is not. The ending is almost like a weird dream sequence, where we have this kind of series of really three shocking events, one after the other, and then the movie just cuts off after that. It's kind of like the ending to City of the Living Dead, but less abrupt, I would say, and more. It's definitely a finality kind of ending, but it's not. It's not like just like, okay, we couldn't figure out how to end it, so we just cut to black at the end. But that's just kind of my opinions on it. Pieces is, again, I just actually just got the 2-disc Blu-ray set of it. But Pieces is one of kind of my favorite like good bad movies. It's an interesting film. The history of it is interesting. The atmosphere that is in it is very unique to the film. In terms of kind of the ideas that are presented in it, and with how colleges sort of function, which doesn't work correctly in our reality. But I want to know what you think. Have you ever seen Pieces? Do you like Pieces? Are you a fan of Italian horror? Are you a fan of slashers? Does this movie appeal to you? Put your thoughts in the comments below. As usual, I like to know what you're thinking. Hit the bell for notifications, hit the like button, subscribe, and remember, I live my life free of compromise. Do you?